Let's talk about it.
Me.
Hey guys, it's Mrs. Klein.
And Mr. Creighton.
We're here with your Lesson 4 podcast, and we're going to do one podcast for this lesson. It's all about life in medieval towns. There's a guiding question for this lesson, and it is, what was life like in medieval European towns?
There are 4 social studies vocabulary words you guys need to know. They are apprentice, charter, common law, and guild.
All right, moving on to the content, you guys. All right, the growth of medieval towns. By the High Middle Ages, towns were growing again. One reason for their growth was improvements in agriculture. Another reason for the growth of towns was the revival of trade.
Some towns grew wealthier because local people specialized in making specific types of goods. As towns grew wealthier, town dwellers began to resent their lord's feudal rights and his demand for taxes.
Many towns became independent by purchasing a royal charter, which granted them the right to govern themselves, make laws, and raise taxes.
All right, guys, talking now in section 2 about guilds. Medieval towns began as centers for trade, but they soon developed into places where many goods were produced as well. Both trade and production were overseen by organizations called guilds.
There were 2 main kinds of guilds, merchant guilds and craft guilds. Guilds provided help and protection for the people during doing a certain kind of work, and they maintained high standards.
Guild members paid dues to their organizations. It was not easy to become a member of a guild. Starting at around the age of 12, so that's a lot of you guys,
Yep.
A boy and sometimes a girl became an apprentice.
At the end of 7 years, apprentices had to prove to the guild that they had mastered their trade, otherwise they weren't going to be able to do the job.
No more.
All right. The next section is all about trade and commerce. As trade and commerce grew, so did towns. By the High Middle Ages, more local people were buying and selling more kinds of products, including everyday goods like food, clothing, and household items.
With the growth of trade and commerce, merchants grew increasingly powerful and wealthy. Not everyone prospered, however. Medieval towns commonly had sizable Jewish communities, but in Christian Europe, they often faced deep prejudice. The hostility of Christians sometimes backed up by laws, made it difficult for Jews to earn their living.
All right, now a little bit about homes and households. Medieval towns were typically small and crowded. In poorer neighborhoods, several families might occupy a single house with only one room in which they cooked, ate, and slept. Wealthy merchants often had splendid homes.
Even for wealthy families, life was not always comfortable compared to life today. About half of all children died before they became adults, and those who did survive began preparing for their adult roles around the age of 7.
Remember the other day, you guys, I kind of talked to at least my class about the fact that you guys were like middle-aged if you lived in the Middle Ages right now.
Yeah.
In general, people of the Middle Ages believed in an orderly society in which everyone knew their place. So boys, you would learn your dad's trade, and girls, you generally were responsible for household duties.
Yeah. All right. Next section is section 5, diseases and medical treatment. Unhealthy living conditions in medieval towns led to the spread of disease. Towns were very dirty places. People lived crowded together in small spaces and usually bathed only once a week, if that.
Ew.
Rats and fleas were common and often carried diseases.
Common diseases for which there was no cure at this time included measles, cholera, smallpox, and scarlet fever. The most feared disease was bubonic plague, known as the Black Death. No one knew exactly how diseases were spread. Unfortunately, this made many people look for someone to blame. For example, after an outbreak of illness, Jews, often a target of unjust anger and suspicion, were sometimes accused of poisoning wells.
Remember, guys, a little bit ago we did talk about how Jews are persecuted all throughout Europe.
There you go.
Medieval doctors believed in a combination of prayer and medical treatment involving herbs.
All right, now moving on to crime and punishment. Some of this is going to sound familiar to our barbarian law activity we did. All right, besides being unhealthy, medieval towns were noisy, smelly, crowded, and often unsafe. My gosh, why did people even want to live in there?
Yeah.
All right, people accused of crimes were held in dirty, crowded jails.
In the early Middle Ages, trial by ordeal or combat was often used to establish an accused person's guilt or innocence. Just like Mrs. Klein said, sounds a lot like the barbarians with what we talked about earlier. Punishments for crimes were very harsh.
In England, kings in the early 1100s began creating a nationwide system of royal courts. The decisions of royal judges contributed to a growing body of common law. Throughout Europe, court trials based on written and oral evidence eventually replaced trials by ordeal or combat, thankfully.
And that should sound somewhat more familiar to us because that's what we pretty much have today. All right, our last section is leisure and entertainment. Many aspects of town life were challenging and people worked hard, but they also participated in leisure activities. Townspeople also took time off from work to celebrate special days such as religious feasts.
Fair days were especially festive, as jugglers, dancers, and clowns entertained the fairgoers. Guilds also staged mystery plays in which they acted out Bible stories.
Mystery plays gave rise to another type of religious drama, the miracle play. These plays dramatized the lives of saints, often showing the saints performing miracles or wonders.
All right, you guys, we've got, this has been a very short podcast. We've got our lesson summary. So at the beginning of the Middle Ages, most Europeans lived in the countryside, but by about 1200, towns started to grow.
All right, guilds, trade, and commerce. Many towns were wealthy enough to purchase a charter that made them independent from feudal lords. An economy based on trade and commerce significantly changed daily life. Guilds became leading forces in their communities. Farmers bought crops, and merchants brought many goods to sell into town marketplaces.
All right, homes and households. Homes varied depending on how wealthy or poor a family was. Most families had small, crowded homes with only a fireplace for heat. Few children were educated. Girls married relatively early and boys began work as early as age 7.
Disease and treatment. Medieval towns were crowded, noisy, and dirty. Diseases spread rapidly, and many people could not be cured with the medical knowledge of the time.
All right, now a little bit about crime and punishment. Crime was a problem in medieval towns, and it was punished harshly. Prisons were filthy, dark places, and many prisoners had to buy their own food.
All right, finally, leisure and entertainment. Despite the hardships in a medieval town, many types of leisure activities made life more enjoyable for town dwellers, including games, fairs, festivals, and religious plays put on by guilds.
All right, you guys, we have that guiding question again, which was, what was life like in medieval European towns? You should be able to let us know a little bit about that.
Yeah, and just a reminder, the vocab was apprentice, charter, common law, and guild. Remember, you guys are going to have a quiz coming up pretty quick.
All right, you guys, don't forget to eat your greens.
Okay, thanks.